So here comes our Q&A.
Absolutely.
Okay, so question number one.
Yes.
You were a vocalist before you became a composer, right?
So I sang, yes. I played violin.
Yes.
I played the tuba. And then I also studied some piano. So I did all of those things. I mean, I played in youth orchestras as a violinist. I could play Brahms Symphony No. 4 as a violinist in my team, right? As a second violinist. Similar level on tuba, sonatas of Beethoven and Mozart. Even played the Mozart E-flat major double concerto as a pianist. So, but before that, yes, my earliest was I started singing in church as a very little boy. I remember 2 or 3 years old, I sang in church.
And when did you start composing?
I started composing in my early teens. I mean, I became familiar with a lot of music, and then I would hear, as you walk along, you hear melodies in your head from things that you had heard. But then I started hearing things, and I had no idea what these things I was hearing were. And I would ask my teacher, sing them or play them to my teachers, and they had no idea what they were. So, and then understood that these were my own ideas floating in my head. So then I started jotting them down, working them out. Maybe I guess the age of something like 13, 14.
The next one is, do you ever suffer from composition of writer's block?
No.
No?
So far, knock on wood, that has never happened. I have ideas every day. And the trouble is sometimes, I mean, the ideas come at the worst times sometimes, which is when you are not ready to receive them. So for instance, you could be driving a car, you could be out for a walk, you could be in the middle of talking with people, and the ideas come and you have nothing to write them down, or you're too busy to write them down, or there's so much going on that you barely hear them. So it's not a problem that I've had so far. Thank God, and knock on wood.
That's so great. And the next one is, do you think that solitude is necessary for the creativity, or does loneliness enhance the message of the music?
Solitude and I think loneliness are two separate things, right? Loneliness is a feeling of sadness from being alone. Solitude is just being alone. Yeah, I think to some degrees being alone is necessary for creative work. And it depends on, I mean, it varies from person to person. There's a Canadian composer named Alexila Louis, who was originally from Hong Kong, who talks about growing up in a large, noisy family. And so she had to learn how to shut all the noise that wouldn't leave her alone out, so that she could study piano when she was a young girl, and then later on composing. Everybody's situation is different. Everybody's talent is different. But I think that, yes, any kind of artist who writes has to be able to focus on the work and to hear the work and concentrate on the work. So some degree of aloneness, or if we call it solitude, is necessary for you to contemplate and work on and complete a work. I definitely believe that.
Yeah, absolutely. And what do you tell young musicians who are trying to find their own voice?
I would say that each person is different. We have a multitude of talents, a multitude of personalities. And I think for a young artist, it's difficult because there are many things that they have to do at once. One of the things is that they have to absorb a tradition. So they have to learn from teachers and learn what there was before them, right? And then they also have to understand themselves, right? Understand the specific talent that they have. I think you can be inspired by the example of people who went before you, but you also have to understand how you are different from the people that went before you. For instance, in the case of composers, there are composers who have talent for composition or talent for generating new ideas. Even among composers, some composers are good at illustrating poetic ideas, while other composers are basically good at absolute music, or if you have somebody like a Wagner who have new ideas that change things. So those are specific talents, not just talents, but I guess proclivities, like, the areas of interest of composers. So I think young composers have to find who they are, right? What talent do you have? Some composers have talents as instrumentalists while some do not, right? For instance, Wagner was a horrible pianist. While Rachmaninoff was a great pianist, composer, and conductor. Glenn Gould was a great pianist. His compositions didn't really impress anybody, right? So you have to find where your specific talents are, and while you can be inspired by other people and while you are learning the tradition, I guess do not let the tradition learn from it, but don't let it make you lose sight of who you are. And you have to be true to yourself and develop your own talents in your own way. I mean, some composers, for instance, say Shostakovich would walk outside, think about his compositions, come back, and then just write it down, right? Whereas other composers might need to work it through on the piano. For instance, Liszt had a working desk with a keyboard there, right? He played and wrote, right? When you see pictures of Richard Strauss, it was just a table with scores that were elevated. So perhaps he was just writing directly without the piano. So understand your specific talent. Don't be ashamed of your talent, and try to develop your own talent in your own way of working. I think, so it's not easy for a young
musician.
But that's what they have to understand, is that they're learning the tradition plus learning about themselves at the same time.
I think that would be a priority, would be like to get someone to trust themselves. And for me, I don't think being an individual, being original, is about looking for originality. It's about allowing yourself to blossom, because I think everybody has original ideas. Just like you said before, everybody is completely different. So that's what's so amazing about human life. So,
absolutely.
I think that's true in music too. It's just allowing people to be themselves, and there's a certain sort of teaching which is always saying no, and that's bad.
I agree.
And obviously there are things, and the point of teaching isn't say everything is wonderful and to make suggestions, but I'm always conscious, especially suggestions about things to do with musical test of always leaving a door open and always feeling well. This is an idea.
I agree. I was just going to point to for instance, your specialty as a pianist, as a concert pianist. No two hands are the same, right? And the way people's muscles react and work. There are general principles about, of course, the way the keyboard reacts to different pressure or different touches. But I think, for instance, each pianist has to understand how their body interacts with the keyboard, right? And that's a part of the learning process and becoming a professional musician. So just to bring it to your specialty, I think.
And lastly, I'm curious to know, first of all, if genius is something that is inherent or can be cultivated, and then what's your definitions of genius?
That's an interesting question. Yes, if we look at organization like Mensa, they have a benchmark definition of what a genius is. For instance, somebody who has an IQ of 140 is in their definition a genius. But there are people who have a so-called genius and they leave without necessarily leaving or creating any sort of mark. And then perhaps there are people who might not necessarily fall in this category who do wonderful things. So what is the importance of genius? That's a good question. And I think it has more to do with the development of ideas, right? How does the composer develop the ideas? Does the phrase that comes second, or does it have any sort of link with the preceding phrase? Does it make sense with the phrase before? I think that tells me very quickly how good the composer is. So, again, this question of genius, we have talents in many different areas. I think I brought up before, Rachmaninoff was a great pianist, composer, and conductor. But then you have other composers who are hopeless as instrumentalists or hopeless as conductors, for instance, as they say Ravel was hopeless as a conductor, as was Schumann. But their talents lay in other areas. And I think no matter how great your talent is, again, going back to finding your own voice, I think work with what you have, work with the talents that you have. I think that's what you have to do.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think we have done all the questions here.
Yes.
And I wish you much luck with your future projects, in your future success, and it will be fascinating how they unfold. And thank you so much to being
Thank
here.
Thank you. Looking forward to seeing you again, and hope we have a chance to work together at some point in the future. Hopefully, maybe we can create an opportunity for you to play here in Canada.
Great. Thank you so much.
Great to see you, and thank you for having me.
Thank you.
Right.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.